In this video, we're going to be solving rational expressions. So remember, rational expressions are anything that looks like a fraction, sum A over B. The difference now is we're actually going to be solving them. So we're going to have equal signs. The big thing to keep in mind with solving is you have to check your answers. Make sure the answers that you get for x equals some number are not restricted values. It is very common for you to get a restricted value as your answer, and those you will actually end up throwing out. Those are what are called extraneous solutions. So the first example we have is two fractions set equal. So these are actually what we call proportions. We have this property, it's called the cross product property, that says if you have this, if A over B equals C over D, then AD equals CB. What that says is you can multiply top to bottom, top to bottom. On the diagonals, that is called cross multiply or the cross product property. So anytime you have a fraction equal to a fraction, or what is called a proportion, anytime you have a fraction equal to a fraction, you are going to use the cross product property or cross multiply. This is probably the easiest way to get an answer, is if you have two fractions equal to each other to cross multiply. So in example 1, we've got 2x plus 1 over 7 and x minus 3 over 5. Now, because I have a fraction equal to a fraction, I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. So my first side says 5 times 2x plus 1. The other one is 7 times x minus 3. Now, order doesn't matter. So whether you want to write 2x plus 1 times 5 or 5 times 2x plus 1, I don't care, as long as you get it on the diagonals. So now we've got two things that need to be distributed. So I'm going to distribute that 5 and have 10x plus 5. And I'm going to distribute the 7, have 7x minus 21. Now this turns into a linear equation. I have no fractions, anything strange. I'm going to move all the x's to one side, all the not x's to the other. I always move the smaller x over, so I'm going to say minus 7x minus 7x, which will give me 3x plus 5 equals negative 21. So now I'm working on moving everything away from the x. Minus 5. So I get negative 26. Divide by 3. And I'm going to have x equals negative 26 over 3. Now, leave your fractions. I don't want mixed numbers, decimals. Just leave them like they are. Remember I said you have to check these. So I'm going to go back and check my restricted values. Well, in this case, my restricted values, my denominators are 7 and 5. Anytime you have a denominator of a number, you're going to have no restrictions. So here I have no restrictions, so that means negative 26 over 3 is probably good. So the second example, very similar thing. I have a fraction equal to a fraction. So I'm going to cross multiply. I'll have 6x times x plus 1 equals 5x times x minus 3. Now I'm going to distribute. So I have 6x squared plus 6x. And on the other side, I'll have 5x squared minus 15x. Now, because this is different than the other one, I have x squared and x's. This is making me think, okay, I may be doing some kind of factoring. So I'm going to move everything over and get it equal to 0. Again, I like to move the smaller to the bigger. So I'm going to minus 5x squared. That's going to give me x squared. And then I'm also going to add 15x, which will give me 21x equals 0 because everything over there canceled. So now I'm looking for something to factor. Well, in this case, I have x squared and 21x, so I can factor out an x, and I'll be left with x plus 21 equals 0. So now I'm going to solve this. I'll have x equals 0 and x plus 21 equals 0. X equals negative 21 and 0. So with these, it's important, it's crucial that you check your restricted values. So I'm going to check my restrictions for this one are where the denominator equals 0. So here I've got 5x and 6x. Now I need to set both of those equal to 0 because those could potentially give me two different restrictions. However, in this case, they both give me a restriction of x equals 0. So that means if I get an answer of x equals 0, I have to throw it out. Well, I did. So my only answer is x equals negative 21. That is the only answer that you would plug into Hawks. So for example 2, I've got something different. I now have one fraction equals fraction minus fraction. Or in some cases, fraction equals fraction plus fraction. I cannot do the cross product property here when I have three different fractions. That only works for fraction equal to fraction. So these are going to look a little different. I want to get rid of the denominator. I want to get rid of the fraction. Now, before I actually get into any solving, Hawks is going to ask me for 2 steps. First step is always going to say find the restriction. So the restricted value is where the denominator equals 0. These are the same restricted values as chapter 7.1a. So I take the denominator, 4, 4, 4, all the denominators and set each one equal to 0. So I have 4 equals 0, 4 equals 0, 4 equals 0. None of those denominators will ever be 0. So for this one, I have no restrictions, which is good. That means there is no value of x that I can't have. X can be anything. The domain in this case is x equals all real numbers. So now in step 2, it's going to ask me to solve it. The way I want to solve these is first find the LCD and then multiply everything by the LCD. Now, the reason I want to do that is because if I multiply by the least common denominator, it's going to get rid of all of these fractions and make it much nicer. So in mine, the LCD, or the least common denominator, is 4, which is easy because they already have a common denominator. So I'm going to take and multiply this whole thing by 4. What that means is essentially I'm going to distribute 4 to every fraction. Now this is 4 over 1, so I'm multiplying every top by 4. So I have 4 times negative 3x over 4 equals 4 times negative 5 over 4 minus 4 times 1 over 4. So all I did was multiply through by the least common denominator, and in my case, it's 4. Now, if I multiply by the right LCD, stuff will cancel. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Again, I can only do that because I multiplied every single fraction by the least common denominator. So now I've got negative 3x equals negative 5 minus 1. Got negative 6. So I'm going to solve this, divide by negative 3, divide by negative 3, and then get x equals 2. So my answer is x equals 2. Now, I checked the restrictions. Remember, in step 1, I found that there were no restrictions, so it's pretty likely that assuming I did everything right, 2 is correct. Now, the way I could find this is if I plug 2 way back into my question, if I plug 2 in way up here, I should get the left side to be equal to the right side. Now, if you have time on the test, certainly try that, but just know as these get a little bit harder, it is going to get more in depth and take more time to plug in, but keep that in mind that you can check all of these just like you check any other equation. Alright, so our final example, probably the most challenging type. Still my same steps apply. The first thing I have to do is find the restrictions, and in Hawks it will tell you find the restrictions. So my restrictions are where I set every single denominator equal to 0. So I've got x plus 3 equals 0, and then I'm going to set the other denominator. So that means I'm going to get two restrictions of x equals negative 3 and x equals 2. Now 8, yes, I have over 1, but because 1 is a number, 1 will not ever equal 0, so I'm not going to get a restriction from that second part. If you had an x over there, you have to set every single denominator equal to 0. So my two restrictions are x cannot be negative 3 and 2. Okay, so I'm going to keep that in mind and store that really until the end of the problem. I need to identify my LCD. Well, think back to last section. My LCD is all the unique factors. Now, yes, I have a 1 in that last denominator, but 1 multiplying by 1 doesn't change anything. So my LCD is x plus 3, x minus 2, not x plus 2. So there's my LCD. Now in the last one, I saw, okay, once I find it, my second step is to multiply the LCD by every single thing. So here's my original problem. So my second step says multiply the LCD by every single thing. Again, multiply the LCD by every single numerator because I'm multiplying this fraction by x plus 3, x minus 2 over 1. So that's why I'm multiplying every single numerator. Now, if I did that right, stuff will cancel. So, x plus 3 cancels, x minus 2 cancels, nothing over there cancels with the 1. So I'm left with x minus 2, 2x minus 2, plus x plus 3, and 6x plus 4, and then I'm left with 8 times this whole thing. Again, if you multiply by the correct LCD and you multiply everything on the numerator, those fractions should go away. If they don't go away, you're doing something wrong. Now I need to FOIL and undo all of these parentheses so that I can combine up like terms and hopefully solve it, whether it's by factoring or by regular linear equation. So I'm going to FOIL all of this. FOIL, FOIL, FOIL. So I've FOILed everything. Now this 8 I now need to distribute because I can't distribute that 8 until everything is FOILed. I cannot just distribute the 8 into this first set of parentheses. I have to FOIL this whole thing like I have here and then distribute the 8. I'm also going to go through and combine up all my like terms. Alright, so now I have combined up all my like terms on the left and then distributed the 8 on the right and pretty much just carried everything down. So now I can start moving everything over to one side to get equal to 0. So I am going to move everything over to the left. It really doesn't matter which way you move it. So I'm going to move that over. And then minus 8x. So over here, I'm going to have 0 because all of these are going to cancel. And these will actually cancel. I'll be left with 8x plus 64. So I've got 8x plus 64 equals 0. So now it's a matter of solving it. So I'm going to minus 64, minus 64, and I'll have 8x equals negative 64, divide by 8, and get x equals negative 8. Now I want to check to see if that's one of my restricted values. So if you look way over here, x equals negative 3 over 2. Both of those are restricted values. X equals negative 8 will never be an issue with the restricted values. So my final answer is x equals negative 8.